interested in this. We had, quite a large number of people interested in this topic, so I think we'll probably be doing more on this front. I'm going to have our participants, our panel, introduce themselves in a second, but just to kind of go through it, we're going to be talking first about the data acquisition process and what's involved. Secondly, we'll be talking about efficiency and storytelling. And third, MLS, not versus, but maybe a little, the MLS versus the broker and the consolidation and collaboration in data distribution. Just a few housekeeping items. Number one, everybody here is a customer of LocalLogic, but this goal of these webinars and this masterclass series, please join us for some in the future. You can listen to past ones. It's not an infomercial. We're proud that everybody's a customer, but really the goal is to have this really be a learning exercise, not an advertisement. So I just feel like that's important, and that's why I like them and we do them. The second thing that I wanted to say is that generically, when we're talking about data, we're not actively talking about listing data per se. We're talking about other kinds of data. So we won't be getting into like things about IDX in a big way. So just to kind of set the table. Now I'd like to, before we kind of start with the data acquisition process, can we kind of go around the horn and introduce ourselves? You guys are all leaders of the industry, so I suspect a lot of people will know who you are, but we'll start with Dan.
Thanks, Audrey. Dan Troup, Director of Data Operations and Strategy at RE/MAX. Back in 2018, RE/MAX took a more serious step in really taking data seriously, their own data as well as aggregating data. And we started a little company inside called 73. And 73 is kind of the data arm of RE/MAX, where we aggregate about 420 MLSs on a 15-minute interval. We also are in charge of curating and outside source data, outside MLS data, so public record data or any other sources of data that the business needs. We're in charge of sourcing that. So we have a great team over here that works on that, and I'm happy to work for that team. Been with RE/MAX for a little over 18 years now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I know you are an expert on all things data. We spend many an hour talking about it. David?
Yeah, my name is David Gumpper. I kind of head up anything in the technology sector for the Wav Group in consulting. I spent over 15 years as CTO for Michael Saunders and Company, a full-service real estate brokerage in Sarasota, Florida, before 5 years ago, joining the Wav Group and doing consulting services within the real estate sector as well as outside. I have several clients that are outside of real estate, which makes it even more fascinating, dealing with different types of data in those arenas.
Thank you, David. You also, I know, have worn many hats and are quite the expert. Let's go to Jill.
Yes, hi, Jill De Silva, Senior Vice President of Product for Engel Volkers. So similar to what everyone else has been talking about, really aggregating data, figuring out the best ways to present it, both internally for our network as well as externally for our consumers, and making sure we're vetting out the quality of that and how we can kind of best serve it.
I think that's an interesting qualification that we might want to tap into as we go into storytelling. Is internal. It just kind of popped into my head, Jill. Internal versus external, and is there really a difference? So I'll put that pin on that one for you, because I know you deal with that a lot. And most people don't know is Art Carter. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. I'm of course being facetious.
Art Carter, CEO of California Regional Multiple Listing Service. I've been in this position for 18 years. I'm also the managing partner of Venture MLS and on the boards of directors of RE Alchemy, RE Distribute, and a new entity that we're starting called RE Core that is more data centered.
Cool. Thank you, Art. I appreciate all of you taking the time. So let's just jump in. First thing is the data acquisition process. So let's talk about that. Art, I'm going to quote you. Not all data providers are created equal. You said that on a video for us. And we grabbed a hold of it and thought it was really important. Let's talk about what that means for each of you. Let's just go around the horn. Like, not all data providers are created equal. So when you look for different data providers, what are you looking for, and what does that sentence mean to you? And Art, if you want to go first, since you said it, that would be great.
Yeah, kind of the meaning behind that was that, we're all providing certain levels of data, and some of it's factual, some of it is, looking upon, some of the interpretations of those data points. And not everybody takes that process as seriously as local logic does. From our standpoint, we wanted to make sure that the data was complete, the data was reliable, and that any of the forward-looking or some of the fuzzier edges of those data points were elements that we could trust upon. We were not finding that in the industry as a whole. I think especially with the introduction of AI and what AI can do with data, you got to be very careful. AI is only as good as the underlying data that it's relying on.
So true. I agree with
so you. We're keenly, focused on making sure that we're starting off with the right foundational elements. And as I said, not everybody is going to give you those foundational elements that you can trust on. And it builds a very tenuous upside, when you're not starting with data that is reliable.
Well said. Well said. Anybody else? I know we're going to try and keep on time here, but anybody else have any comments on this specifically? Want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think even before you get into evaluating your data providers or doing that evaluation, is you really, the one thing that I've done a lot lately is been helping people in my engagements to, understand what data do they need. Because a lot of times they will say, hey, we need data. And then they'll go out and find, a provider, but then it doesn't meet their expectations or to their satisfaction. So the first step to that would be do your homework, do your due diligence to understand what data that you want, how is it best going to be used and served by the business. And then you can align that and map that to the best data provider that you're evaluating.
I agree with that. Any other comments before we kind of segue into what are you looking for? Jill, I see you. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of what I'm looking for. And I think it goes to what Art was saying as well. How robust is the data? If you have to start pulling data from multiple places to get it to align, it's never, exactly equal in terms of what you're exposing to consumers, again, internally. So making sure you know what you want and that the provider you're working with can get you what you want to get that how that we were talking about, that result.
That's what got me on this topic in the first place. And then I'll pass to Dan for a second on sort of how you vet the vendor. We'll move to that, Dan, and let you kick that off. But that's what got me on this topic is all of you do provide. I didn't pick any clients that don't have multiple data sources with us, so it really got me thinking, because we do take a lot of calls where people are like, I do want to streamline, so I get it from one provider. Is the format the same? Is the cadence of delivery the same? Are the fields the same? It's the same. So I agree with you completely, Joe. Dan, if you want to kind of talk about that process a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I like this quote from Art as well, that as I start to think about data providers, I'm a very savvy buyer, right? That I want to kind of know how the sausage is made. I want to get involved in it. And there are the people that are collecting the data. There's people that are just curating the data, that are putting it together and matching it up. So I'd like to know sources of stuff, how they get that data. Is it old data? Is it newer data? Are they the ones collecting it? Is someone else in charge? So I like to look at supply chain. I think of it as supply chain. And as David said, the right data, but also at the right time. Sometimes we buy data and we're not ready for it as well. So implementation of that data we'll get into later. But if there's data providers who are on this call who are listening as well, I'm very much involved in understanding the process of that they get to their end result.
Yeah, I think the source of the data is huge. What other things as we go around, and I'll go back to you, Art, is like, are you looking for, are they integration, support, innovation? What part does a strategic relationship play in that process? I mean, people don't often talk about that, but sometimes that's relevant as well.
Yeah, I mean, as Dan mentioned, we would dive in underneath the covers to make sure that we're, absolutely assured of the sources of the data, that we felt comfortable with all those pieces of data. Those strategic partnerships, you also want to look, forward thinking with a company that, what you're currently consuming from them, do they have the capabilities of bringing some new elements into that and some informative things to the data sets that you're bringing in. We're on we're on a headlong, I don't know if it's either a fall or a march to becoming as property centric as we possibly can.
Right.
And, that transition is not an easy transition. And we want to make sure that those partners that we have can move along with us as we're having to transition and pivot sometimes within the elements that we're providing.
I think that's a great comment. Grow with you, not just, solve a need at a point in time. On that note, let me ask you a question, Jill, and then I'll come back to David. Jill, when is an RFP necessary? Like, when do you, and this is something I wonder sometimes you see an RFP and sometimes you don't. Is it the person deciding that wants one? Or, how do you set that criteria?
I think it goes back to that getting under the covers. If there's really like uncovering of data and making sure everybody's answering the same questions and can, give us not the same answers, but like we're looking at the different data points we want, the different data sets, where they're coming from, and making sure that across the board, we're just asking those same questions. We'll do it in a more formalized RFP. But as David was mentioning earlier, if we're really doing our due diligence and we know what we want, there's very often people we can say can't give us that data because just by looking at what they say, we've already taken people out of the mix. And then a formal RFP is less needed. It's just getting the right partner and aligning with them. And then making sure they can support you as you build it and integrate it. So those other things that you mentioned, I think, are really important, because once we have the data, yes, we have to determine what we will do with it and how we will use it. But sometimes you do run against challenges or issues, and you want support from the other side to say, number one, have you done this before? Have you seen it done before? Or we're thinking about this. Can you help us get there?
And not only that, different types of data, different maybe review process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, not all data sets are created equal in terms of how you review them. A question for you, David. In your past experience, how do you determine the success of your data partner? I know, loaded question. We'll go around on this one.
Yeah, this one. This is.
If you want to pass it off to somebody else to start,
not at all. Okay. Because it's something that
I put you on the spot there.
Yeah, no, it's exactly one of the things that I did very much when I was at Michael Saunders is evaluate the different providers that we had, and then eventually brought it in house, right? And then I was that provider, so and had to measure what we were doing, but. A few things that I look for and measure against is, definitely SLA, service level agreement metrics. I set those right up front, usually within the contract or the agreement that we have with the data provider to understand, some metrics like, what's your first call resolution ratio, and understand that, and, second day, third day resolutions, and not only that, what's your uptime and mean time, and deal with those and set those right up front, and then use those as metrics to see, are they providing the support? Because support's the most important thing. Once you have gone through implementation, then it's, pretty much operations at that point. And that's where there could be issues with different providers on how well they handle your needs as in providing that support in real time. And then also it's their strategic relationships with their third party. If they are aggregating data from third party providers for themselves to help them coalesce it, like LocalLogic does, then it's understanding, what their strategic alliances are and we, relationships are, and we kind of watch how they develop and grow. Is there constant issues or challenges with that? Then we measure it from that standpoint. And not to give a free plug to Wave, but and I know you're working with Wave now, but I do think like a consultant can really play. Like I do think like Wave does a lot with data and MLSs and large brokers, and I do think like that kind of role can be really important. Whatever consultants you're working with, they're really, really valuable. T360, whoever it is, can be super valuable in helping you set those metrics if you're not used to doing it in-house. So I do think like that's where consultants can come into play in a big way. Deanne or Art or Jill, do you have anything like more that you measure on, or anything else that you look for? I did love that David highlighted support, because that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, I also
go ahead, Jill.
Go ahead, Jill.
The data itself, when we don't have people coming to us challenging the data that we're giving to them or exposing it to them, or saying, but I saw different information somewhere else, right? When the data is truly supporting itself and people can buy into what we're saying about neighborhoods or anything else, I mean, we use that as a measure of success too.
A good data provider welcomes that feedback.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, David kind of alluded to it, that not everybody is going to have all of the data points that you need. And we didn't discuss this on the pre-call, but what really led us to local logic was we kept on asking people, where are you guys getting the data? And inevitably the answer was local logic. And I'm like, why would we remove ourselves a couple of hops down the line? And it's okay to be, more than one hop down the line for the data, but, it's really partnering with a company that, understands how to deliver that data in a good way. And
I appreciate that.
That's the main thing that, we're looking at is, if you're going to consume data, you want to get it from as close to the source as you can, but there's some trade-offs to being as close to the source as you possibly can. And working with a company such as yours, is a perfect example of a win-win situation.
Well, I appreciate that. That's actually for sure why I came over here, and I work here, as the head of strategic partnerships. I was attracted to that coming over here. I do want to be mindful of time. So Dan, if you want to slide something in, otherwise I'll move to the next topic.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Art said there.
Sure.
Getting this close to the source, where the water comes out of the mine, as I like to say. It's raw though, right? Like it's unrefined, and it could be difficult to get all the pieces. And when you work with someone like Local Logic or any of the other data aggregators out there, they're mixing and matching the pieces together to give you a full product.
Thank you.
But the downside to some of that sometimes is you are 2 to 3 steps away from the source. So as an old mentor of mine used to say, and as you guys are saying right now, it's from a support standpoint, a throat to choke. Can I get back to the person who's in charge of this, right? Like,
wow, that's a good one. I don't know if we're going to grab that clip later, but all right,
I hope I appear as a quote on one of your next webinars.
I do, but I think I'm going to choose something else. All right. Okay.
So can you pick up the phone call, right? I mean, being a company such as ours, we have really good SEO rankings. The public contacts us all the time about their property.
Oh yeah.
Because you search their address, even though if it's not on the market, they're going to see square footage and AVM value, and they call and make complaints that the AVM is not high enough or it's too high. Well, we don't get
a consumer complaining about the AVM.
Yeah,
shocking.
Of the AVM. So can I go back to my AVM provider and say, look, these values aren't adding up. We're getting consumer complaints about them.
Well, let's use that as a segue, because I think that's a good segue into the next section, which is efficiency and storytelling. And we'll spend like 10 minutes on this because certainly we have a pretty nice topic of the MLS versus broker at the end. So Andy Florence of CoStar, the Andy, he said, so we are providing basically a Google for Life in the United States, and it's the most robust documenting and storytelling about all communities, estimated at 20,000 communities. It's tens of thousands of parks, hundreds of thousands of schools, tens of thousands of condo buildings. This means if you paint a picture about the neighborhood where you grew up in, you light up, and it immediately becomes meaningful to you personally. This was a quote that a bunch of people did sort of retweet or whatever you want to say. I think it was pretty meaningful. I do think this talks about sort of a little bit more as we get into types of data and data as a storytelling. How do you meet, this is the question that I had in my head. How do you meet those needs from a business perspective versus a consumer? We'd like to say they're all the same thing, but not always. So how do you balance that? Jill, I can tell, I think this resonates with you, so please jump on in.
It does. And I think it does go to what, again, different people were saying earlier about being able to get as many sources from possible from one source, because then we know the story we're telling paints an accurate picture. The way your neighborhood lines up with the points of interest and the local demographics and things drawn out the same way means that when someone's coming and they're looking for information about that neighborhood, you are painting that picture. And so what we like to do is take the data that we have and then build the story around it. We really have our people who are local experts in the market tell that story in the way the text is written on the site and the images that are used so that they can see it from their eyes. They can picture themselves living there. So I think it's a combination of taking the data and then being able to fluff it up is not the right word, but add some of that someone can put themselves there. And I think post-COVID, it's become even more important. right? People can kind of work anywhere now. So where they live has become really
where you live is where you work, and where you work is where you live. I say it all the time, right? I'll turn it over to Art. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think this also goes into this whole thing of the agent versus the consumer in terms of how you provide data. And is there a difference? Personally, I think there's less of a difference than there used to be, but you tell me.
We think the broker and the agent are the best people to paint the picture. You're going to have outside companies that are painting a Picasso where that is not a true representation. You get somebody with two heads coming out of these representations. And the consumer, I think, recognizes that. They want to attach to a local expert. And it's our job, all of us on this call, to give these local experts some of the data points and the elements that they need in order to accurately paint that picture for their consumer. That at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's the brokerage's consumer. And we've got to do a better job across, especially on the MLS side. I'll let Dan take some shots at me, but on the MLS side,
hold that for the next topic. Hold that.
we've got to do a better job of helping our brokers and agents paint a better picture than what's being painted out there.
I couldn't agree. I always say, like, in my head, consumers online, we know 99% or whatever are online first. They see information about the property. They get to the point where they need to talk to an agent. They're actually 80%, these are all NAR statistics, are driving by even before they call anybody. If they're in physical proximity, they call the agent and they're like, hey, what is this? What else is about this neighborhood? I looked online, and the agent is like, the last thing you want an agent doing is then going to the site that they went to and trying to validate that information. You want the agent to be able to go in, whether it's through their MLS system or their brokerage system, and say, well, we are experts and this is what we know, whether they know or whether they live in that neighborhood or not. I'll turn that over to David. I know you have thoughts on that. Oh, David, we lost
muted.
Audio.
Yep,
there you go.
I got it. No, I'm just going to echo a little bit on Jill and Art, but add a little to that is that I think we also still need to educate brokers and agents on that consumers are becoming smarter and more intelligent, and that the data that they once thought was just what was okay and necessary, it's got to be more depth. It has to have more richness to it. So just as what Art just mentioned, but I think it also means that we need to partner with the brokerages and agents to help them understand that, to glean that great information that they have inside of them, how to glean it out of them and find methods and ways of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, I know you have something on this.
Yeah, I like to think of this. I want to answer your second part about consumers and how consumers search. And, my time in this industry, which isn't as long as some of the others on the call, but I've seen many attempts at entering in these, I want to live near a golf course. I want to, these different types of searches, right? Lifestyle type searches. And none of them have really been successful. I really think the home searching process is different than that. It's more like finding a flight. Like, I know where I want to go. I know I need this many bedrooms. I know I need this much square footage. And then are the schools okay there as well? It's kind of like this add-on data that comes after the fact. Very few people I feel like are searching, and I could be wrong on this, but I can tell you from Remax.com standpoint, I know that majority of searches are by city or zip code and not by school district or neighborhood. Just off the top, we know that it's much smaller percentages on that side. However, it doesn't mean we don't reference the school districts and the neighborhoods within the properties. But I don't think they're starting at that level saying, I want a good neighborhood, a great school. I only want to pay this much per square footage. Show me the communities in the United States.
I don't know if I agree with you, to be honest. I think that was true I'm sure you have the data on Remax, but I think if you gave them that ability to search that way, it might be interesting. I do think like the pandemic has shifted that. I think that was true 3 years ago, but I think, as Jill pointed out, people live where they work and they work where they live. I think they're much more in tune to that, because if I'm working at home, which I am, and then I am looking for the coffee shop and the grocery store, perhaps more forward than I was maybe 3 years ago, so I don't know, you're the expert, but I mean, I wonder if that's shifting. It's just a question in my head.
I also think it shifts if it's my actual first home, like meaning my.
Well, that's true too. That's a good point.
Secondary residence, where you are more looking for the lifestyle versus just the where?
Well, especially age, and age factors into that in a big way.
I would love more stats on this, Audrey, and I think I've recently been
Okay.
about this, but
Fair enough.
I believe majority of moves are still happening within metros than people actually leaving. I know it's sexy to talk about migration from
Sure.
Washington to Idaho and California to Idaho, but I think the majority is still not there for that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to hear that from Andy, because his other side of his business on the commercial side actually speaks against that. They want more people in the office, in the metros, in the downtown areas, in those spaces. So it's data that I think is necessary and should be attached to a property. But I 100% believe that the local expert there is the agent.
And, no question.
That agent, if we can surface that knowledge from that agent and package it up, and we've done some work on this, package it up and make it nice and make them the local expert and continue to promote them. That's definitely the path.
Yeah, and I was not saying I 100% agree with that. I think it's just more a matter of where the consumer starts and is the consumer search shifting. But I totally agree with you. At the end of the day, it is funny. At the end of the day, you can go to all these sites, and I certainly support them. But at the end of the day, you want validation from somebody who knows the area, period. You just do. So you want validation of that presumption that this is the right place to look. Let's move into the next topic, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions and such. And I really like the last topic. So MLS versus broker.
Why does it have to be versus, Audrey?
I know. Okay. All right. I'm just trying to create.
I think you're adding. You're trying to make this an exciting.
I am. I'm trying. Thanks for helping me along with that, Mr. Throat.
More of a tag team wrestling match. We're on the same side.
I know. Okay. So MLS and broker, and that absolute beautiful environment of collaboration that we have happening today. How do you guys, so if the MLS is bringing in some points of interest or demographics or whatever, the broker is also bringing in that data, how do the two entities and sides make sure and ensure this collaboration is as effective as possible for both the consumer and the members and agents that they all serve? So who wants to jump in on that one? David, let's any ideas on that? I know David's like, damn it, what are you doing that to me?
Here's your bus, David.
I know. You keep muting yourself, so we're going to move on to Art. Go ahead, Art.
I think it goes back to the cooperative, effort that MLSs can participate, in with our brokerage community. We believe that brokers are better together, serving the community as a whole. And in that cooperation, I think there's some pretty extensive data elements that, go past just, whether or not a property is active, pending, sold, and all of the nuts and bolts about that property. I think there's things that brokerages could share with each other that would help intelligence-wise. You always got to be sensitive at the MLS level that you're not stepping on, Dan and Jill's competitive advantages that they may be building from a technology standpoint. But I think when, you can get brokerages thinking about ways that they could collaborate and cooperate with each other and, still beat each other, about the head when it comes to getting consumers, to their brands. I think that's the role that MLSs should be filling.
Well, it's interesting. I do say, and then I'll pass it to Dan because I'm sure he has something to say on this. But I do say, like, when we talk about data, sometimes we'll get the question of, who do you serve, like the broker, the MLS, or who's your target audience? And I said, in truth, it doesn't matter. We have actually retail that use us, industrial, you name it. Because the truth of it is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether I'm buying a home for the first time or I'm buying a multifamily or anything else. At some point, I'm trying to understand and mitigate risk, right? It's me in my first home and I want to make sure I'm making good investment, or a $50 million multifamily building. It's irrelevant. And whether I'm the consumer or the agent, at the end of the day, it's about understanding and mitigating risk. So wherever you get that data. Sorry, go ahead, Dan, on this topic.
Yeah, when Art brought this up in the pre-call, I was excited to hear that, MLSs would consider adding in third-party data or additional data. Obviously, validation of existing data is something we want to see. We want to make sure we know about this specific property, but I'll take school district, for instance. If you want to build a national website or portal such as remax.com and you want people to be able to search by schools, I can't rely on MLS data for schools. It's not standardized. It's not normalized. No one's using the national school ID that we use to match the district, which gets us to kind of Audrey's data, right? So if a lot of the challenges there are matching that data to existing data. So we have to rely on location matching and boundary matching. So we have to reach the outside third party to get that data. I think getting more validation from the agent on the school district or any of these other data sets would be huge, to know exactly their local expertise. Even think of things like broadband, getting the agent to talk to the homeowner what's available and not rely on things like the FCC to tell us what the broadband is at the home. So
yeah, those data sets are out there. Those data sets are interesting.
Those data sets are out there, but we have to go acquire them, which I don't mind acquiring and vetting that process out. And then we have to try to match it up to create kind of this national footprint to get that kind of coverage. Man, but I would love more interaction with our data partners, which the MLSs are totally our data partners, to come to more standards there around that. And, you know, that's things like RESO can help with.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think the whole industry started with RESO, right? And unfortunately, I've been in the industry long enough pre-RESO to know how horrible that was for everybody involved. And RESO's made a huge difference. Jill, what is your feeling on this?
Yeah, no, I do think by ways of collaboration, it would be great. I do think anyone, and Dan, you said 447 MLSs. I'm probably only integrated about 200 of those, but the different nuances
pretty good
across the different MLSs, you know, and their agreement to allow us access to that information, should it be part of their data sets, and how we can expose it is one of the things that, you know, we just would all need to be comfortable with, because we can do a lot with the data when it's coming separate from the MLS than what some of the MLSs allow us to do with their data now. So I think it's definitely getting to that point of total collaboration when we all believe that the data is in the best interest of the consumer, and coupled with the property and serving it up would be valuable for them.
That's really so true. I mean, this does take us in an area I didn't know I really wanted to get into, but it is like soul. Thank you for that. Soul data, things like that are, you know, very different per MLS, and can be kind of. I do think it always goes into the question of who sits on the board of the MLS, and, you know, tends to be the larger brokers, and in making sure that we engender a level playing field within the industry, because once we do that, it serves the consumer. But when we load the deck, right, we're not serving the consumer ultimately. So David, I don't know if you're off mute, right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay.
I'm off mute. Sorry. I
No
have my
worries.
little mixing board here.
I know you got.
Anyway, but no, I can. I think where the MLSs definitely can collab with brokerages is, you know, we talk about all these different data sets, and the collaboration there is, you know, if the MLSs can have, you know, partnerships or relationships with companies like Local Logic, then how can brokerages get access to that data in a very reasonable cost, at a reasonable cost that makes it simple for them to be able to do the things that they want to do with data. You know, I think that's where that collaboration could really strengthen the bond between MLSs and brokers. And to Dan's point, I mean, I can validate his point. I just recently bought a house up in North Carolina, outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, down by the Research Triangle. And I needed to go to many different sites. I couldn't rely on the data, and the school district is a great point. You know, in the school widget that was on the website that was available for it, said the school was in one school district. But then when I looked deeper and did a couple other sites and found out, no, guess what? This home is actually in a different school district, and a school district that I didn't particularly want to care for, but I wanted to be in a certain school district. It made a big difference. It caused me as the consumer to have to go around and use many different sources, and school district was just one of them. I actually used probably about 5 or 6 different websites that, in order to get all the information as I was doing my home search. Now, granted, I'm a little bit more educated in real estate on doing that. But I think, again, it goes back to what I said before. Consumers are becoming smarter in their search and what they look for. They have more needs of what they want today versus what they, before prior years. And then looking for more information. And the more that we can provide that information as an industry, whether you're a broker or an agent, and it can be provided by the MLS and make sure that it's provided in a way that's very reasonable cost-wise. It's a win-win situation from a collaboration and working together.
Actually, I think schools is a great example, to be honest. And schools is tricky because agents, I don't know if this rule is still in play, but way back when, for me, when I was agents can't speak to schools, like the quality of the schools. So you really, it's like they are experts and they often do say, let's face it, but generically, technically, they're not supposed to, and it dramatically affects the home price, right? So I agree with you. That's the kind of thing the consumer is looking for that is very powerful, whether they're on a MLS site or a brokerage site or a consumer portal, it's irrelevant.
But in David's example, that school district is probably correct in the MLS. The agent probably knows or gets it right in the MLS.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's not aggregated to the federal IDs that are around our schools, that is the issue, because they have to do a boundary lookup based upon the geocode of it. So that's how they're doing it, and that's why it's wrong on that site. It's probably wrong on Remax.com as well.
Yeah.
Let's surface the agent's expertise. That's what I'm trying to say. And the same is true for neighborhood. Although,
right,
I hate to bring up the topic of area codes, or the area IDs that MLSs have, but they are the local expert there. How can we surface that kind of at the national level?
Yeah.
Well, and there's also neighborhoods that are really just locally known. They're not in any data set.
Well, and what defines a neighborhood? Like, we provide park data, and sometimes somebody will say, well, you missed that park over there. And I'm like, well, that's about 50 feet of a little, like the median. And it's not actually designated as a park. It's a fenced off. So you have to find that line, right? And this is, this is hopefully what your data providers, whoever they are providing for you, is that to give you that ability to point to that expertise. I do want to move to questions unless anybody has anything more to say. I think we've got some good questions, so I want to jump in. Okay. David, you're going to like this question. So do you have an AI model coming out for real estate specifically for itself? So how are each of you addressing, I do actually want to do a separate webinar, I think, on AI, so stay tuned in the masterclass. But let's go ahead and do a hot tip. How are you dealing with AI?
Right now, just doing a lot of investigative work for myself to see what tools. I mean, there's a plethora of tools out there, from business intelligence. There's Meet Cody that provides some type of business intelligence when you feed it some data. It's not just Chat GPT anymore. There's a plethora of them out there. So it's kind of looking at what can they do, where they are smart. We are having these conversations with people on where does it make sense, and to be honest with you, Audrey, I think AI is going to make a lot of sense when it comes to search. It's going to change.
Yeah, we're putting a lot of effort into it. Yes. We are definitely looking at it at doing stuff, and we have it in some of our current products as it is. But I agree. And Jill, I mean, your thoughts and feelings on this. So you guys are in a big brand redesign. So, and I know agents can actually, I don't know what percentage of agents are really doing it, but they can actually write their property description via AI and things like that. So how are you factoring all that in?
I think the same as David was saying, we're doing a lot of research right now. And I think we're finding a lot more success with other things besides ChatGPT that are actually more on point. And really, so what the common person is using, not common, but like what the average person is using and looking into is very different than what our team is investigating. We have someone who specializes in linguistics and learning how do you talk, what kind of prompts do you use to actually get accurate data. So it is definitely a little bit of fact finding right now to ensure that, yes, it's always great to be first to market, but you want to be right when you do it. So making sure that when we come out with something that we can stand behind it.
Yeah, good. Any Art or Dan on this one, on AI, or do you want to take a pass?
Yeah, I mean, most MLSs are just dealing with the low hanging fruit at this point, image tagging and, trying to derive facts about, properties out of photos. The bigger picture is, you're right, on the search side, being a little bit more truer to, some elements of how consumers search. You know, we're working with a company right now that I'm excited about some of the products that they're coming out with, that, you know, the element of even allowing somebody to place their furniture in a new house and know whether or not it's going to fit in some of the elements that they're doing, and being able to search off of that. You know, those are some of the cool things that are coming up.
I agree. I think that's amazing. Any piece of furniture you buy, you can place it in your room. It's incredible. Dan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so we're doing some interesting stuff with machine learning models right now to help extract more information from MLS data that may not be well defined by the agent. So think of things like Mountain View waterfront, those kind of things that are really exciting. I'm seeing some demos from the team that's been working on this, and it's amazing the information we're able to categorize to allow consumers to pick out details that would normally be just a checkbox in the MLS. The second thing is obviously generative AI, right? What are we doing with that? And, you know, thinking about how we can enable the consumer to pick a path there, whether it's with photos or with other things within there, is very interesting to me. And I would love to see us make some advancements in that space coming soon.
I agree. Well, we're just about at time at 1:45, so I'm gonna wrap us up. I think it would be great if our next webinar was on AI, and talk about sort of where we are in real estate. I think it's a pretty hot topic, and I think it's coming in like the gale force wind. Kind of reminds me of you know, when we all first went to the conferences and with the headsets, and there were virtual tours and things. It was all seen as very groundbreaking, and now it's mainstay. So I think the question is, you know, where does AI come in as mainstay? Thank you all. Wait, maybe we have one more question. Somebody raised their hand, but we're not doing any verbal questions, so sorry about that. Thank you all for taking the time and joining us. I really appreciate it. You're all captains, so to speak, of the industry, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and of course being a customer. So if you want to contact any of these people directly, find them on LinkedIn. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you at our next masterclass. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.